It's kind of hard to believe that just a few short months ago, we hit the 3-year anniversary of the original Surface Duo. Because of that, I thought it might be fun to sort of do a retrospective, take a walk down memory lane, and kind of from afar now, look at how Microsoft handled Surface Duo and sort of grade different portions of its history again with the benefit of retrospection. So, like I said, it was all the way back in September of 2020 that the original Surface Duo was released. Now, of course, its history goes back much, much further than that through the courier years. It involves a version of Windows that would actually be canceled. Andromeda OS, this was Project Andromeda, that was scrapped, and then Android was sort of slapped on this thing kind of at the last minute, and then it was shipped. It was a very, very odd situation, but 2020, September the 10th, that is when we got this thing. I bought it. I ran down to my local Best Buy. I waited out front in the parking lot on that September 10th until they opened at 10 a.m. and they brought my box out to me. And I scurried home just as quickly as I could to very excitedly unbox this thing. I don't know that I had ever been more excited to unbox a product than I was for the original Surface Duo. I don't know that I can really explain why I was so excited, but there was something about this device that was just captivating to me. The thickness, the thinness, perhaps you should say, still, even now, 3 years on, it doesn't feel like a device that should exist. It just doesn't even seem like it should be real. The hinge, the way that it folds all the way back around and it's just flush. You can actually like almost feel air being pushed out whenever you close it because it's just such a beautifully designed piece of hardware. Now, it's not without its flaws, obviously. My USB port is broken off. Mine is actually cracked from a fairly small, not very high height of a drop. It landed just perfectly and hit that front glass and it cracked. I've got a screen protector literally on the front of it to kind of hold everything together. But still, yeah, there's just so much about this thing's hardware that's just immaculate. Of course, I'm running a custom ROM now, so it doesn't quite look like it looked whenever it first came out. When it first did come out, the reviews were somewhere between middling and pretty darn bad. A lot of people absolutely raked this thing over the coals because it shipped with a whole bunch of bugs, and I saw those bugs when it first came out as well. The most prevalent ones that really bugged me were ones that somewhat stuck through for the lifetime of the device. Unfortunately, the black screen bug, you would be using the device and one screen would go black as if it had been folded around. When it folds around, it's supposed to shut a screen off, which even this RAW manages to do. But for some reason, a screen would just shut off. It would think it was being closed, and it wasn't. Of course, the gesture, swiping up to go home, sometimes it just wouldn't land correctly, right? Some of the gestures controlling it just wouldn't quite do what you wanted them to do, and that was very frustrating. In fact, a lot of us switched to the 3-button navigation in those early days to get around that because it just didn't work that well. Unfortunately, this device had a touch digitizer, or I guess I should say 2 touch digitizers, that did not have Android drivers. Microsoft had to create those drivers. And the result was that just look, you put a bad digitizer in your device, and no matter what you do with those drivers, it's probably never going to have like perfect touch response. And that remained true of this device through its entire life. It launched in a fairly rough state, and it was, I think, rightfully reviewed kind of negatively. Now, some people like myself saw the magic underneath the bugs and we stuck through, and it received a ton of updates. Some of the updates made things a lot better. Some of the updates would make things actually worse than they were the month before. That was sort of like par for the course with the Surface Duo in those early days. Well, I should say, I was going to say in the early days, but that's not true. That kind of remained consistent through the entire lifetime of both devices. Get a little better, then it would get a little bit worse. My comments were always just wild, back and forth craziness. But some things did improve. Like the touch response did get better, the gestures did get better. They got to a place where, personally, I don't really think that there's much of a problem with them. I can swipe up to go home and it's going to be just fine. Of course, I'm running a custom ROM, so we really shouldn't judge it like super, super harshly as to like how the touch works, because this is not the official ROM, but you know what I mean. It did indeed get better. But one thing that really was a problem is the fact that it shipped with Android 10, and by the time it was out, Android 11 was already out. We were waiting and waiting and waiting for Android 11, and unfortunately, we had to wait all the way until January of 2022 for Android 11 to come out. And in fact, that happened 3 months after Microsoft released the successor to Surface Duo, the Surface Duo 2. That was as unacceptable as anything that they did with these devices. You can say that it launched in a bad state, and that's unacceptable, and you're right. You could say that the updates didn't do enough quickly enough to add new features and to squash bugs and to keep them squashed, and you would be correct about that too. But the cardinal sin, the unforgivable sin as far as I'm concerned, is making us wait until January of 2020. From September 2020 to January of 2022, 3 months after the sequel had come out, to get Android 11. And yes, unfortunately, by then, Android 12 had already been on some devices, and we were already behind the 8 ball once again. Now, speaking of Duo 2, much stayed the same, right? It did get a little bit thicker. It did get a little bit heavier. They did add this very large camera bump to the back, which some people were okay with. I was okay with it because I knew what it meant. I knew why they did it. No longer would we be folding ourselves into phone mode and then taking photos with a selfie camera that would turn out not very good. No, indeed, we now would have an actual proper camera setup with a primary, an ultra wide, and a 2x telephoto, 3x, 2x telephoto, which you could argue is almost useless, but it's there and it's, I guess, better than nothing. And the camera performance was indeed a lot better than Duo 1's. And if you installed a Gcam port, I would say that the camera performance was actually reasonable. I took some pretty darn good photos with my Surface Duo 2. Yes, you did sacrifice the perfect flatness of phone mode for the right to have a halfway decent camera, but again, some of us were okay with that. Some of us were really bothered by it. Overall, though, I did think Duo 2 was a really big step in the right direction. Unfortunately, the reviews for many people were only a little bit better than Duo 1. I think people had this thing in their head about what Surface Duo was, that it was buggy and it was bad and it was weird and nobody wanted it. Duo 2 came out, and I think a lot of people didn't really give it much of a fair shake, and those early reviews were not particularly good. But the updates did continue coming, and eventually we did get Android 12. In fact, it was the Android 12L variant, the variant for larger screens. Granted, that took 10 more months for that to arrive, which was, again, completely unacceptable. But around that time, after 12L, we started seeing something rather strange, right? We started seeing reviews coming out, like re-reviews, editorials being posted by people in the industry saying, I've changed my mind about Surface Duo 2 to be specific. I get it now. I'm actually using this device. I enjoy this device. It's not as buggy as people say it is. It actually has some value. The fact that you can launch one app and then your home screen is still right there next to you to launch your second app, just like a dual monitor computer setup, as I point to two monitors that you cannot see. People started getting it because finally the software had arrived at a place where it was pretty good, actually. Now, that's not to say we were past the problems, because there was at least one more instance where, at random, bugs got so bad, people weren't able to receive text messages, phone calls, apps were forced closing. I actually took my main SIM out of my Duo 2 with much chagrin and disappointment and daily drove, I believe, my Z Fold for a little while. Happily, about a month after that all kind of blew up in our faces, all those problems kind of went away again, and we were back on the path of happiness. Things were looking quite positive for Duo and Duo 2. We also were hearing rumors that there's a Duo 3 in development. Everything seemed kind of bright. In fact, at this point, I posted a poll covering Duo 1 and Duo 2, asking people to rate the experience they were having with their device. 1 being it's unbearably bad, 5 being the best phone you've ever used. And look here, Duo 1, look at most people, at a 4 out of 5. That was pretty shocking. Likewise, people voted that Android 12L had lived up to expectations to a large part. Again, people were weirdly, strangely satisfied and happy with this device. Unfortunately, that's kind of where the story would rather, I was going to say abruptly end, but that's not true because it would just sort of limp forward from there anticlimactically, because after 3 years, this just a few months ago, Duo 1 reached end of life. It only was going to receive updates for 3 years. We had reached 3 years. The updates are over. Duo 2 has another year left to be receiving updates. And unfortunately, this is the last dual screen device we will ever see released by Microsoft, because not only did we begin hearing that Microsoft had decided to make a foldable screen device for Duo 3, something like the Pixel Fold. Unfortunately, we then heard that after some pretty darn big, significant layoffs, Microsoft decided to focus on things that made the money right now in Duo. Duo 2, that project simply is not one of those things. And because of this, the Duo project was placed on the shelf and likely forgotten about indefinitely. It's unclear that we will ever see Microsoft return to this project, even as they talk about how they maybe regret canceling Windows Phone. We see them talk about how important Android is to them. Their own phone seems to no longer be a priority. Duo 2 continues getting updates most months, security patches, right, to keep it safe, with no new features having been delivered for months and months, and no new features will be delivered with all certainty. No new Android versions are coming. The device is The Walking Dead, basically, at this point. It truly did become, for me, sort of a story of what might have been had Microsoft actually put the full force of their company behind it. The marketing power, the money, build a team large enough to truly cover this device and get the software where it needed to be day one. Have Duo 2 launch day one in the place that it basically is now. How different could things have been if they were truly committed and delivered a Duo 3 experience? We will likely never know, because this half in, half out mentality sentenced this device to an early grave. And of course, many of us have since moved on to new devices. Many of us bought a Z Fold 4, 5. Many of us bought a Pixel Fold. Many of us bought a OnePlus Open, and we have moved on. And sometimes we pull this guy out of the drawer in our living room or our kitchen, the junk drawer perhaps, and we look at it and we think, I miss you. I wish you were still getting updates and getting new features, and I wish you had a big brother that had just been released that was top of the line and had all the software stuff going for it, but it never happened, and I had to move on. And that's a sad, sad place to be. As good as these folding devices are, I love my Pixel Fold, I love my OnePlus Open, they are not Surface Duo. None of them do multitasking as well. None of them do multitasking as easily, as automatically as Surface Duo, and none of them ever will. That's just my opinion, and I know that many of you share that opinion. Guys, hit those comments down below. Give me some memories. How did you feel first getting Duo or Duo 2? When did you jump on board? How does it feel looking back, knowing that this project is just not continuing anymore? Again, hit those comments down below and talk it out. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.